Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khairan for joining us again for another episode of Information is Power, MPAC UK's book club. So today we're going to talk about our monthly review, Inescapable Questions, Autobiographical Notes by Alija Izetbegovic, who was the leader of the Bosniak Muslims during the time of their ethnic cleansing and genocide in the 90s. So just jumping into it, Alhamdulillah, it's a really, it's an amazing book by an amazing man. That's my personal opinion. But Asma, what do you think in terms of who is it aimed at? Who do you think benefits from it? What was like the big thing you took away when you read the book?
So if I am completely honest, like when I first held this book, my perception on Islamophobia was always, is it a brown person problem? Is it
racism.
Like a racism problem? And maybe because it was my experiences in life where I grew up in Dagenham, where we were like the only few Asian people around, and I always kind of thought of everything on a racism perspective. But these were blonde-haired, blue-eyed Muslims who were ethnically cleansed so heavily, like that they're still digging up bodies today, and they're still burying their dead today. So when I picked up this book and you saw like the first-hand kind of accounts of what happened during that time, it's so horrific, but you see it from what I would call a true Muslim's eyes, because his character shone through and through, and you thought, this is a really good Muslim, this is a good example of how to be as a Muslim, because he went through so many persecutions in life, but yet he still held on to everything he believed in.
So it's not just a history book, is it? It's not like, oh, today this happened, the next day this happened. It's not like a diary.
No, not at all. It's kind of everything from where he was born, his people, where they came from, his first arrest, how he went through life just always really holding firm to believing in Islam and the freedom, justice and equality for all Muslims in not just Bosnia, but like in general, like all over Europe. Like he was just like, I think it comes from the First World War and the dismantle of the Ottoman Empire, and how that really affected Yugoslavia, which was what Bosnia was a part of in the first place, and how when Yugoslavia was kind of cut off from the Ottoman Empire, then brought into Europe, and that's when really trouble started for them.
I mean, it's I'd agree with you that it's not just about historical dates, like this is what happened here and this is what happened there. He's a really good writer and speaker. He must be a really good writer and speaker. And maybe a bit of a tangential shout out to the translators and the publishers who are based in Leicester. They must have done a great job translating this, because it flows so well. And like what you were saying in terms of like, it's really clear that his principles were something that were deeply rooted in his heart. And you mentioned his first arrest. He was arrested multiple times. And like, it just makes you think, you have to wonder, why did he allow himself to get arrested? Why was he doing things that were like arrestable offenses? The first thing that he got arrested for was basically running an organization. I think it was called the Young Muslim Movement, or the Young Muslim Organization. And basically the idea was that it was a Muslim alternative to the communist, not just the political communist party, but also the communist ideology as well, because communism wasn't just a way for politics to work. It was something that they were trying to push into society itself. And communism is a very much an atheist ideology. So what the Young Muslim Organization was trying to do under Alija's leadership was to propose that the Muslim Ummah must sort out its own problems, must be able to stand on its own feet. And it was clearly something that was really important to him on two counts. Firstly, like I mentioned, he got arrested, but he was also leading the organization. So, I think he's a humble guy, because I never got the sense of like bragging, like I was the man for the job, or I was the only one who could do it. Like obviously he criticizes people, and he criticizes. I think the Bosnian word was Hodjas, which was sort of like the and again, I might be wrong, but the way I kind of interpreted it was like the Muslim scholarly leadership or the Muslims who ran like madrasas and mosques and so on. He saw them as people who only were interested in the rituals, in doing the rituals correctly. They had forgotten or were ignoring the spiritual aspect of Islam. And it's really interesting. Like,
It's
feel
so
free to
true,
jump
you
in,
know.
but like the way this guy absorbed Islam into his heart
Yeah.
and was able to, he had to do something with that. And what he did was try to lead the Muslims to freedom. That's what Islam meant to him when it was
You know,
in his heart.
it's so true when you say that, because there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that the heart of a Muslim is fashioned differently. And
Right.
what is meant by that is that if true Muslims, you can call yourself a Muslim all you want, but if you truly don't believe what you want for your brother, what you want is what you want for yourself, what you want for yourself is what you should want for your brother, then that really you can't, like, I see Muslims every single day, like, and I'm going to give you an example, and I'm not going to beat around the bush. All these Dawa boys, like, they're so hot on like bringing each other down and cussing each other, and you did this and you did that, like, and it's all got to do with money, and it's all got to do with who's doing well, and it's got to do with who's doing really popular at the moment, and whoever's really popular at the moment, the other one's trying to bring them down.
Right.
That's not what you should want. If you want your brother in Islam to be doing well, you need to be there holding him up. And one thing that we saw with, like, in history, what history always repeats itself, and it has a bad way of us not learning from it and repeating itself. And what I mean by that is that throughout the whole of Islamic history, every time the Muslims are doing badly, it's always the Muslims that have to go to war with Muslims first. And you see that with Salahuddin, and you see that with the wars that were between the Moroccans and Algerians, between the Arabs. Back
So are you
with
saying
Lawrence
this
of
happened
Arabia.
in Bosnia? Or?
Exactly the same thing that's happened. So the Muslim imams at the time were just so passive and so focused on do your salah, pull your trousers up, learn your hadith, learn your Quran. Forget about if your Muslim brothers and sisters are suffering. That doesn't matter. Like, what really matters is your salah and your salah only. So you become a very selfish Muslim. That's what I mean. And it's being a Muslim it should be a selfless act. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm not doing well. If my Muslim brother's hungry, I'm gonna feed him.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if I'm not doing well. If this brother needs help, I'm going to help him up. I'm going to help him build his business. I'm going to help him do this. I'm going to help him do that. If they're suffering, I'm going to go help them. And, you know, it's such a beautiful ideology that he's teaching you, is that the easiest way of beating Islamophobia and beating kind of any way of racism to be stopped is through politics, and how we need to become politically active. And it is so apparent in this book that if we allow Islamophobia and if we allow MPs and political ideologies to come forward without a narrative, or without being contradicted without our imams, without Muslim leaders saying, no, you can't say that, you can't burn the Quran, you can't call Islamic prophets, like, you know, vulgar names, like, you know, you can't do that, it's hate speech. Because what happens is those ideas fester, and when they fester, it doesn't go away. They become bigger and bigger and bigger until this dark manifestation becomes something like a genocide. You know, I always say, like, that we are on an iceberg with us in the UK. You know, we've had a few neo-Nazi terrorist attacks. They've never really been portrayed in the news as like these were terrorist attacks, but they were tried and jailed under terrorism laws. So,
and like something that what you've just said really reminded. So when Alia said that the people, like the grassroots public, got on well, like that was a hint. Like, yeah, you know, grassroots public get on well, but those who are above that, those who are in power, politics, the easiest way to stay in power is to say, hey, look, I'm one of you, and if you don't support me, these guys who aren't you, they've got it in for you.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, whether it was
See it happening
communism,
today.
yeah, and again, still totally relatable. And what got him in trouble in terms of getting him arrested the second time was something that he had written before, I think during his first imprisonment. It was called the Islamic Declaration, I think. And basically it was like, he's a philosophical guy.
Yeah.
He's like, and you get that through reading, and you get that through reading what he was reading about. Like, he was reading these dense philosophical texts. Anyway, so sort of like to get his thoughts onto paper, I guess. He wrote something called the Islamic Declaration, and the basic idea is that the Muslims need to look out for the Muslims, and we need to reverse this trend in the Muslim Ummah of destruction, self-destruction, etc. And Muslims need to get back up onto our own feet and sort ourselves out. Something that was about the Muslim Ummah, and something that was very conveniently useful for the communist leaders to target him over. So what basically happened was, about a dozen intellectuals were labeled as, including Alia himself, was labeled as a conspiracy group, that they were pulled together by the ideas in this book, and there was a plot to overthrow, or a plot to sow dissent and dissension against the ruling Communist Party. And like that entire court case, that time in prison, for me, like, was another learning experience. Like, do you remember that bit from the book? What did you get from it?
So if we look at what he actually wrote in his declaration, he just talks about like the oneness of the Ummah and the need for the oneness of the Ummah. Like, if Prophet ﷺ taught us one thing, it's like we are one human body. And when it comes to the concept of the oneness of the Ummah, I'm talking Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. Allah asked us to submit, and we submit, and we try to have to be one morality, one body, one heart, one mind.
Right.
It falls in different directions. But if you are one body, if you're this one water mass of water, you move together, you move like the waves, you move in unison together. If we are so concentrated on ourselves and we don't learn to move together, we're never going to be successful in this lifetime. Look at the Muslims today, and you're talking about a guy, this happened almost 50 years ago now?
No, 30 years ago.
30 years ago, yeah. 30 years. No, well, the start of it was 50 years. Out history, we need to start learning the lessons from it. And from Salahuddin, like, you know, the first war that he had to do was with his own people, with his own imams, like, because they were so passive and they weren't listening, that there's a problem at our door and we need to solve it. Allah didn't just give us one example of our Prophet ﷺ. He gave us so many examples. You know, there was Khalid bin Walid. He was a conqueror. He was, you know, he defeated Iran. He defeated the Persians. He defeated the Romans. He defeated Iraq. He got back Jerusalem. Why? It wasn't because what he did on the battlefield. It was a mind game, and it's about playing the mind as well as playing, you know, the game. And we need to learn that it's time that we come together, no matter which sect you are from Islam, and we need to start solving our problems. This book is a perfect example of that, and we can take so much away from it.
And like, I want to just pull up a few quotes from here. Like, in terms of like being a Muslim who lives by their principles, no matter what the consequence, obviously there's an impact internally and externally. And I'm just going to read this quote and then just quickly tell you what I think. So this was at the trial where it was a show trial, it was a fake trial, and it was so, like, there was a few points I was laughing, like, this is how ridiculous the trial was. And witnesses kept changing their statements because they saw how ridiculous the trial was. So they kept changing their fake initial statements. And one woman who was pushed to the edge, finally she said, "I have told you the truth. I would rather spend 5 years in jail than live a single day in the knowledge that I was responsible for telling lies that sent these people to jail. If you want, I can be sentenced at once together with them." There was complete silence in court. The judge was also silent for a while and then told the witness she could stand down. When Muslims stand by our amazing principles which Allah has set down in the Quran and our Prophet ﷺ lived by in his seerah, it inspires others, even those who are going to be used against us. It even inspires them, like, wow, these are people who have principles that I want to live by and stand by as well. That's an external impact. And internally, I'm just going to read this from Alija Izetbegovic's summary statement once they said that, okay, you're going to be charged, etc. I therefore state, I am a Muslim and so shall I remain. I consider myself to be a fighter for the cause of Islam in the world and shall so feel to the end of my days. For Islam for me has been another name for all that is fine and noble, a name for the promise or hope of a better future for the Muslim peoples of the world, for their life in dignity and freedom, in a world for everything that in my belief is worth living for. And like that is who he was. That was before he went into prison. And even when he was in prison, when, you know, they were trying to crush him, they were trying different things. And what does a Muslim do at that point where he's thinking either I'm going to live the rest of my life in prison or I'm going to die here? He'd been in prison for like 15 years or so. And obviously he's thinking about staying in prison, getting out of prison, or maybe even dying in prison. And he said, I caught myself thinking that I was fairly old and that death could not be far off. That thought brought me relief. I kept it to myself like some great secret. And, you know, it's a scholarly opinion that those who are trying to, you know, live by Islam, they're not afraid of death like the rest of us. And like he'd been living his life according to the Islamic principles that he knew of. He was in prison the second time round simply for writing about what he called the Islamic Declaration, you know, the need for the Ummah to pull together. So like I think that this speaks so much. It's a mark of his character that he was in prison because of his beliefs. He was in prison because of trying to manifest those beliefs for the benefit of the Ummah. And when he had done everything that he could and was in prison again, he thought, well, you know, if it's time for me to die, I'm relieved by the idea, because he had literally done everything he could think of doing. There was nothing more for him to try to do. That is what it meant to him, like what he was trying to do. He wasn't thinking, oh, if only I could get out of prison, make more money, get more cars, etc., etc. He was thinking, like, I've done everything that I can, and maybe I'm going to run out of time in prison. That's fine with me. You have to understand, like, how the word isn't courage or bravery. It's just being able to look at your own death with calmness. That is something that most of us don't achieve in our lives. And I think that that is the highest mark of character that a Muslim can have. Someone who's lived their life trying. And then obviously, he didn't die in prison. He was released from prison. And then he went on to try and set up another political party that carried him through through the ethnic cleansing and the genocide of Bosnians.
But I think that was the saddest part of his life, like, and you felt the sadness in his words when he was portraying what happened in Srebrenica and other towns where the Bosnians were ethnically cleansed. You know, it took years for what happened in Bosnia to be recognized as a genocide. I think it was only recent in terms of like the 2000s, wasn't it? That's when it was officially recognized as a genocide. But for years they had to fight for the fact that what happened in Bosnia was ethnic cleansing. What happened to them was a genocide by the Serbs, because what they wanted was all Bosnians to be dead. That's the simple and be all of it. And it was only because they were Muslims. These are white-haired, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Europeans. So when people say, like, these genocides happened because, it was a racist regime, it had nothing to do with race. It had everything to do with Islamophobia. And if there's one thing I'm going to repeat that we need to learn from Muslims, that Muslims need to learn from this, is that if we allow Islamophobia to manifest, and if we allow political ideologies that go against Islam in the terms of Islamophobia and the, how would you say, the destruction of Islam, then these ideas only manifest and become bigger problems. Like what happened in Bosnia can easily happen in the UK to Muslims, and we've seen it. We've had Muslims that have had their houses set on fire, a woman and her 2 kids because they were Muslim. We had a detention centre in Dover that was targeted by a petrol bomb because they believed that there were Muslims coming in and going to take over the UK. You've had neo-Nazis that have had ideologies of blowing up mosques and things like that have gone to trial via terrorism laws, and they were detained under terrorism laws. But, these are not put out in the media purely because it will go against everything that the UK government are trying to put in place in terms that Muslims are the problem and Muslims are the ones that are going to take over and put in their Sharia law and blah, 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 right? It's that ideology that we need to start becoming politically active and stopping it from happening.
Mm. And I'd want to end with going back to the first question, who's this book written for? Who would benefit from it? If I think it benefits those of it could benefit loads of people, but for me, I think it would benefit those who are Muslims and are outspoken and cannot be silenced. Their heart will not allow them to stay silent, and yet have that worry at the back of their mind, completely understandable, that I'm in a system, I'm speaking out in a system that wants to silence me, and there are secret courts, there are secret trials, evidence is hidden from the defendants, and the court of public opinion is fed and biased against you as a community and so on. So what? This is an individual who lived through all of that and said, so what? And we still remember him today, and he's an inspiration today. And, the system that he was in wanted him to abandon Islam. Instead, he stood by Islam and Allah stood by him. And at the end of the day, just imagine the calmness, being in a situation where there's nothing more that could be taken away from you, and you look towards your death and you think, you know what, I'm calm with this. This is the mark of someone who has a high level of Iman. And if that's not what we're striving for, then what is the point of anything that we're doing? This was a man who wanted to live by Islam, who loved the Ummah, and swapped and traded in his freedom for the need to make a statement, to be outspoken. I can't praise this guy enough. And read this book. If you are an outspoken Muslim who doesn't want to be silenced, read this book and you will take something away from it.
Do I tell you something else? Do you know our whole lives, growing up in the 90s, we were taught Eastern Europeans are a big problem,
right?
But we never kind of told why they are a problem. But they were never a problem. We were only taught a racist ideology because there was a political agenda behind it. And it's always being able to read between the lines, see what you're being fed in the news, see what you're being fed in the media. Muslims are not the problem. The problem is racist ideologies. The problem is Islamophobic ideologies. If you actually believed and truly believed in your heart, every single Muslim will be outspoken. Every single Muslim will turn around and see what is happening in Palestine, see what's happening in Syria, see what's happening in Libya, see what's happening in all these Muslim countries where they're being persecuted, and know that what's happening to them isn't right, and we need to use whichever tools we have in the UK, which is through politics, to help them.
I think that's a good point to end.
Do you know who reminds me of? Moazambek. Because he went through so much, and I've been watching him on YouTube at the moment, and his journey through Afghanistan after 23 years, he's returned, and everything he went through, and he still was turned around and said, because I walked past this river, and at the time he was under arrest. He goes, and I said to myself, one day I'm going to make it back, and I'll get to enjoy this river in this mountain range somewhere in Afghanistan. And it was so emotional to watch that, because you kind of think, you've been arrested, bro, and they're taking you. He didn't know he was going to live. He didn't know he was going to die, but all he could think about how beautiful.
There's a life afterwards, yeah.
And being able to return then.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a reminder, at the time of the Battle of the Trench, when Medina was going to be under siege, and there was this huge boulder, and no one was able to move it, no one was able to crack it, and Prophet ﷺ himself came along to help out. He gave it a blow. There was a crack, and he said, I see the city of Rome opening up. Gave it another crack. I see, the lands of Persia opening up. Don't misquote me. I know that it's worded a bit better than that. But in terms of like whatever obstacle is right in front of you, whatever test Allah has placed right in front of you, there is a life after that. And there's always something to be hopeful for after that as well. Speaking of Muazzam Beg, who is a living hero, alhamdulillah, and his experiences in Guantanamo, next month's book club read is going to be The Mauritanian, written by Mohamedou Ould Slahi. The author was himself detained and thrown into Guantanamo. So that's in August of 2002, I believe. So that's why this is going to be our August read of the month. If you haven't read it before, read along with us. If you have read it before, let us know in the comments what you thought, what questions you'd like us to answer, inshallah, and we'll do our best to fulfill those requests. Have you got anything else to add about the book?
No, we see you next podcast.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.